You are now listening to Talk Loud Radio, sports, nerds, and pop culture.
Watch the deep one for the end zone. Phelan is down there. Oh, he got it! He got it! He got it! Touchdown!
What is going on, guys? All right, welcome to the Armchair Fantasy Show, episode 15, presented by Talk Loud Radio. I'm your host, as always, Jeff Lambert. You can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. You can follow the show at Talk Loud Podcast and the website goingfor2.com. You can follow at goingfor_2. All right, guys, this is the second podcast in 3 nights. I got something special planned for you all tonight. We're going to be doing some daily fantasy stuff tonight. We haven't done that in quite a while, but after the All-Star break, I've been kind of fiending to get back into the studio, so we'll do that tonight. Of course, as always, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and TuneIn Radio. Find us at talkloudradio.com and streaming in the Going for 2 app for iOS and Android. Tonight's guest is a writer for goingfor2.com. He's been with us for almost 2 years now, I think. His name is Kaz Kalita. He also writes for fantasypros.com and for bigguyfantasysports.com. Kaz, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you? Pretty
good, man. Pretty good. I'm excited that we're back from the All-Star break and we got some NBA DFS to look at again.
That week off was pretty boring there with no NBA there.
Exactly.
Look at a little bit of NFL and whatnot.
Exactly. It was pretty brutal. I saw people playing hockey and golf, and they know nothing about those sports, but they were so fiending for some daily fantasy. They were looking for anything to play. I took the break off. I kind of just did some background stuff on the website. I played the two games, the All-Star game and the rookie game, but I didn't really go heavy in those two games because you had no idea what was going to happen in those games. But definitely glad to have it back. You know, of course, we got a huge slate on Friday. I think pretty much everyone seems to be playing tonight. Let me see how many games we got here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games tonight. So a huge slate to look at. If you're ready, we can go ahead and jump right into the slate.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go for it.
All right. We'll start, of course, with the point guard. We got a bunch of top guys here. We got Damian Lillard, who kind of had a little bit of a hot streak going into the All-Star break. We got Chris Paul up here, Kemba Walker, who's actually playing tonight. Last I saw, he was doing pretty well. I think he had 49 fantasy points. Eric Bledsoe's up here. Of these top-tier guys, is there anybody that you think is worth paying up for tonight?
I mean, out of those guys, I think there's a couple of okay options. I don't mind Damian Lillard. Like you said, he was on a little hot streak there before the break. I know in the past, Utah has been known as a really defensive stout and slow-paced team, but this year with Donovan Mitchell, the rookie, they've actually been playing at a little bit quicker pace. They're not as good on defense as they were in previous years. Kemba Walker's okay, and I think Kyrie Irving's okay. I'm not necessarily going and locking any of those guys into my lineup tomorrow night, but if you want to consider them, I think they're okay. And then for the upside in GPPs for sure. But I think basic cash game lineup, I'm probably looking at towards the middle or lower tier, opposed to paying up for any particular point guard tomorrow night.
Yeah, I agree. I think your point about Utah is definitely one that I've noticed as well. People still tend to avoid Utah. So if you want a low-owned player, I think Damian Lillard will probably be low-owned because not only is he the most expensive point guard on the slate, but he is playing at Utah, which people tend to avoid. But they are playing a little bit a quicker pace. Their defense isn't quite as good as it was in years past. They're still a good defense, don't get me wrong, but I think if you want a low-owned sort of like home run hitter, I think Dame is a good way to go. All right, so looking down into these mid-tier options that we got down here, we got Ricky Rubio, which I see is a game-time decision. We got Dennis Schroeder, Dennis Smith Jr., Jamal Murray. So who do you like in these mid-tier guys?
One guy I really like a lot is Elfrid Payton, who came over to the Suns from Magic not too long ago in that trade. And in the 3 games since he's been traded to Phoenix, he's averaged 41.3 FanDuel points per game. He's got a nice matchup tomorrow night against the Clippers. They're only league average against point guards. And this game has the second highest projected total in the night in Vegas. So he's one option I'm looking at for sure in that middle tier.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I love Elfrid Payton. I can never figure out, when he was with Orlando, exactly what you're going to get from him. And from night to night, you get the night where you get the triple-double. Then he'd go out the next night and score like 8 points and have like 2 assists. So I don't really know what to expect from him. But it seems like he's kind of found a little bit of a home here with Phoenix. And they do play, I think, the fastest or second fastest pace of any team. And then the Clippers are also up there in pace as well. So it'll be a very fast-paced game, which I think kind of suits Elfrid Payton's game a little bit more. He's not really a shooter, so half-court sets, I think, sort of affect his game a little bit because he can't shoot from the outside. But if you can get him to open court, which is what the Suns want to do, I think he's definitely a good play for sure. Is there anybody else in this mid-tier that you also like?
Sure, yeah. If you drop down a little bit, I think at 7,000, Dennis Smith Jr. is an interesting option at the Lakers. This is a huge pace-up game for the Mavericks. And the Mavericks play at a pretty slow pace. They're 6th slowest pace in the NBA. Whereas the Lakers are the fastest pace in the NBA, so that's a good pace-up game for them there. They, also, with that fast pace, the Lakers allow the 6th most FanDuel points to opposing point guards, and also Smith he's played at least 30 minutes per game, or each game since January 9th, and over that span, he's averaged 31.5 FanDuel points. So he's seen his role increase over that time and his minutes increase, and this is just a good, nice up-paced game for the Mavericks, and I think they're in a good spot against the Lakers here.
I agree. I think he's been very, very consistent. I don't know if he has the GPP upside that you look for, but I think if you're looking for a cash game option, I think you can expect 30, 35, maybe even a 40-point game from him. So yeah, I definitely like that. And Lakers do have the highest pace, like you mentioned. I think this will be a good game for him as well. As we move down here a little bit more, you got any guys that are sort of in that value range? Some of those like punts that we might want to take at point guard.
There's not really anybody super cheap tomorrow night that I'm eyeing. I guess Austin Rivers at 5,600 is an interesting option at Phoenix. That's not that cheap, but that is, as you mentioned, the Suns play a pretty quick pace. They're not good on defense, so he's an interesting option. Then also, if Avery Bradley misses another game, Milos Tatovic, I think that's how you say his name. He got the start tonight, or he's getting it to start tonight for Avery Bradley, so he might be an interesting punt at $3,600. They're at Phoenix.
Agreed on both of those accounts. I do like that call. What are your thoughts on Andrew Harrison, the Memphis Grizzlies, going against Cleveland, who's been terrible against the point guard? I've been looking at him. I mean, he's a little bit up and down. He had a 40-point game versus Utah. Then he had an 8-point game versus Oklahoma with only 11 minutes. I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe he got hurt. But then he came back again against OKC and had 35 FanDuel points there. Any interest at all in Andrew Harrison?
I mean, it's a good matchup against Cleveland, but I don't know. I'm not looking too much at him. I think at $5,500, he's been too up and down for me trusting cash games. I guess if you want a cheaper option for maybe GPPs to help you fit in a higher priced player somewhere else, I guess he's an okay option. But for cash games, he's not really on my radar at all at this point. Good
deal. Yeah, I can understand that for sure. I think he's more of one of those punt plays, and even like you said, he's not really that cheap at $5,500, so maybe he's not the best play there. But let's go ahead and move into the shooting guard position now. Let me get to my shooting guards here. All right, so shooting guards, of course, at the top, we've got James Harden. We got Victor Oladipo, who last I checked, let me see. Yeah, he had a couple really big games there right before the break, so I think he kind of got back on track after a little bit of a slow period. Bradley Beal, of course, without John Wall, it's been really good. Drew Holiday without Boogie Cousins there has been really good. Tyreek Evans is kind of hard to figure out now because they wanted to trade him, they couldn't trade him, so I don't know where his mindset is right now. But of these top guys at shooting guard, is anybody here worth paying up for tonight?
I think Harden's interesting. I guess it depends. So I'm assuming Jimmy Butler's going to be on him, but I mean Harden's usage rate is so high that I think even with Jimmy Butler defense, he can still possibly hit that 5x even at 11,400. That game between Houston and Minnesota is the highest total game on the board. So I think you can always make a case for James Harden. I think Victor Oladipo I think his price is still priced up too high. I mean, he could get you those 55 or 60 FanDuel points, but he could easily get that 35. It's kind of based on his blocks and steals, how many of those he can rack up. Other than that, I mean, I'm not too high on Bradley Beal. The Hornets have a pretty solid defensive unit, and Beal is hit and miss. It just depends on whether or not Thomas Sirtowski is going to handle the ball more often or not. I mean, there's been some games where Beal's been the primary ball handler with Wall out, and there's others that Sirtowski's been the primary ball handler. So that's kind of hit and miss there. I do like Drew Holiday. It is a slower paced matchup for him and the Pelicans, but his usage rate has come up quite a bit with Cousins out, as you mentioned. So that's kind of my thought process on those guys at the top there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think Harden, I was just looking at his game logs. It looks like the last time they played Minnesota was literally 2 games before the All-Star break, and he still put up 62 FanDuel points. So I wouldn't be too scared of Jimmy Butler on Harden. I think Harden is just that good of a player that it doesn't matter who's guarding him. He can go off on any night. 11-4 is kind of expensive, so you do have to find some value, which we may find some value as we get into the forwards. But yeah, I agree with you on the other two there. I think Bradley Beal, I live in Washington, D.C., so I hear a lot of the scuttlebutt on the radio and stuff. And Bradley Beal, it really depends on what his mindset is when he comes out. Like some nights he's super aggressive. You know, he's taking the ball to the hole. He's shooting it every time he touches the ball. Then there's nights where he just seems very passive and doesn't seem very interested to be there. So it's hard to tell which Beal you're going to get. Now, if you get the guy that, you know, is going to shoot and be aggressive, that's the guy you want, especially at $9,000. You know, that's a pretty good price if you can get that guy. But if you get the other guy, then $9,000 is probably a little too expensive for you. As we move down into these mid-tier guys, who do you like in these mid-tiers?
All right. The first guy I'll throw out there is Donovan Mitchell. And this kind of depends on Rubio's status. If Rubio is out, I love Mitchell a lot more against at 7,700 against Portland. He had a couple of big games there right before the break when Rubio did miss time. So if Rubio is out, he's an option. Also, Devin Booker, his first game back with Peyton, he had a pretty big game against Utah, so he's also on the table there at 7,700. And then if you drop down a little bit more at 7,000, I like Lou Williams a lot at Phoenix. I'm probably going to this might be a central theme of this podcast, but I like picking on the Suns quite a bit tomorrow night with, I already mentioned Austin Rivers and Tejovic if Avery Bradley's out again, and also continuing the theme here with Lou Williams as well.
Agreed there. I agree. I love taking anybody against Phoenix, and then you can take the opposite end of that too and just take the Phoenix players because they're just going to shoot a ton. So yeah, I definitely like that Lou Williams call. One thing I wanted to say real quick on your on Donovan Mitchell, I think we were talking about Utah earlier being a little bit more pace up from last year, and having not quite as good of a defense. On the opposite side of that is the Trailblazers, who people have in their heads that they're a bad defense and that they in the past have been a very fast-paced team, and they didn't play very good defense. They've actually been quite decent this year. Pretty much looking at the D versus P, they've been actually a really good defense over the course of this season, which people think that they're not, but they actually, if you look at their numbers, they are pretty decent. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out real quick. I love your Lou Williams call. I love playing Sweet Lou because you can get him on a hot streak. In a game like this where he probably could put up like 30 shots, I definitely like him at $7,000 as well. As we move down a little bit here, is anybody else you want to talk about in the value range in here in the shooting guard position?
I mean, shooting guard is another position where there's not really a great punt option at the minimum price. I mean, I guess if you move out a little bit more, Wesley Matthews at 5,500 is a little interesting with that pace-up matchup at the Lakers. You can kind of go either way. With it being a larger slate, it might be a little harder to justify using him, but I think he's a decent option if you need $5,500, or if you have $5,500 left over and you need a shooting guard. You can always go there. And then if you want to go cheap, this might sound crazy, but Dwayne Wade at $4,500 at New Orleans. That, as I mentioned earlier, that is a pace-up game. He should be fresh with the All-Star, right after the All-Star break. It is the front end of a back-to-back, so imagine if they do take caution, it's probably going to be on Saturday night, not on tomorrow night against New Orleans. So I think at $4,500, he's an interesting cheap option to use at shooting guard tomorrow night. Agreed.
I'm just looking at some of these prices here. You have an issue with Isaiah Thomas at 6,500. I mean, he hasn't been playing good at all. I'm surprised he's priced that high. Must just be on namesake alone. But man, that's a pretty high price for what he's been doing there in LA.
Yeah, that's definitely a pretty steep price for him. And I mean, that's not a great matchup at all. I mean, Dallas is actually decent against point guards. They play pretty slow. And yeah, as you mentioned, he hasn't really done that much to justify being a $6,100. I mean, he'd have to hit pretty much 30 FanDuel points. And I just don't see that as likely a chance of happening there.
Agreed. I was thinking maybe he was cheaper and I actually searched for his name because I couldn't find him. And I was like, I couldn't find him because I was down too low. I needed to go back up to the top. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to small forward now. Small forward, of course, we got LeBron James, who is playing tonight, so he will be on a second game of a back-to-back. We have the Greek Freak. I'm not going to even attempt to say his name on air without butchering it. We got the aforementioned Jimmy Butler, and that's pretty much the top tier. After that, you get down into the $7,000 range. Of these three guys here, is there anybody you like more than the other?
I like LeBron and Jimmy a lot more than Greek. And this the small forward is an interesting spot tomorrow night. I think you could, if you want to, I think you could spend up at two spots there and go pretty even or balanced or value at other positions with LeBron and Jimmy here. If I had to choose between the two, I think I'd give Butler the edge. As you mentioned, LeBron is on the second night of a back-to-back. Butler's going to be fresh. That is a high-scoring projected game there at Houston between those two teams, and Butler, plays heavy minutes because plays all the starters heavy minutes. So he's going to be locked into probably about 40 minutes. He's going to be probably guarding Harden, so he's going to be pretty active on the defensive end. So he'll probably rack up a few steals, maybe a couple blocks. So if out of those three, I'd probably give Butler. I'd probably rank him Butler, LeBron, and then Greek Freak at number 3.
Yeah, I'd agree with that ranking. And if we're playing the narrative card, I know Butler caught a lot of flack for not playing at all in the All-Star game. For being sick. I mean, obviously from the DFS community, we killed him on Twitter, but just in the media alone, how he kind of, didn't do anything the All-Star break. He was sick. He was on the bench the whole game. It wasn't really announced before the game that he wasn't going to be in. So maybe he comes out a little more motivated to sort of show the world that he belonged in the All-Star game. So maybe a little bit of extra motivation there for his first game back from the All-Star game.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to go along with that, it's a frustrating thing with DFS is Butler was sick. He was obviously sick, and there wasn't a peep or any mentioning at all like that. This, he's sick. He may not play at all, and all of a sudden, people are using him for the All-Star game, and he gets a goose egg. And yeah, it's really frustrating to see that. But it's also frustrating that there was no news at all about that situation.
Yeah, I had this talk with somebody in one of my group chats, and they were asking why there was no news, and I think it's because the beat reporters typically aren't the beat reporters for that team. So like the Timberwolves beat reporter may have not been there, or if he was there, he has other assignments because Butler isn't the big draw. You got guys like LeBron James there, and you got Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. And so that was sort of the draw for all the media, and Butler, being the quiet sort of guy that he is, probably had made no noise about it at all. And it just kind of slipped under the cracks, I believe, because it's just such a big event for the NBA that I think they just weren't paying attention to Butler. And then it comes down to it, and everyone's wondering why he didn't play. I think they went into halftime wondering like why he's got 0 minutes, and it wasn't until the halftime show that I found out that he was sick, that he wasn't going to play the entire game. So yeah, very frustrating if you rostered Butler for sure, but I think that could be some motivation for him going into Houston and to put some big numbers up and show why he should have been at the All-Star game. All right, as we move down into these mid-tier ranges here, is there anybody in the mid-tier that you like?
I think Otto Porter at 7,600 is all right. As we move down even more, I like both Danilo Gallinari and also Josh Jackson in that same game. Gallinari, since he's come back from his injury, he has had a decent floor around 30 FanDuel points. And then Josh Jackson has seen an increased role with Triano wanting to play the younger players more there in Phoenix. So he's seen his minutes come up, his production come up over the last month or so. So those are two guys I'm eyeing at mid-tier right there.
Definitely. Once again, we're going back to that game with Gallinari and Jackson in that Clippers-Suns game, which is going to be very high scoring, very high pace. So you can't go wrong with anybody in that game for sure. All right, going down here into some of these value guys. Is anybody down in the value that you like tonight?
Yeah, I got a couple of options here. I like Royce O'Neal from Utah. This is, again, kind of dependent on Rubio a little bit. If he's out, O'Neal's a decent value option. He had a couple of really nice games before the All-Star break with Rodney Hood being shipped to Cleveland. There's an increase. There's an opening for some minutes and usage there. So O'Neal's definitely taking advantage of that opportunity so far. And also, Rudy Gay will be coming back from injury tomorrow night as well. And I imagine if they're bringing him back, and with how conservative Popovich is, he's not probably going to be on a minute restriction, I wouldn't think. And at $4,300 in a pace-up game at Denver, I think that's a decent spot for him to be a sneaky value option.
Yeah, I like Rudy Gay as well. And what did you think of the news that Kawhi Leonard may not play all season?
That's pretty crazy. I mean, that's another situation where no one knew that's how severe it was going to be, or how severe it is right now. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, he's out for the rest of the season, possibly. I mean, it's kind of crazy there as well.
Yeah, definitely crazy. I didn't see that coming at all. I mean, he's been kind of in and out. I think he came back for a little bit, then got re-injured. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of a surprise that, he may not make it for the whole season. So, but somehow Popovich keeps doing what he does. I think the Spurs are still third in the West, so go figure. He's got a bunch of miscellaneous parts and his all-stars on the bench, and he's still somehow figuring out a way to win games.
Oh, definitely. I mean, he's one of the greatest probably of all time, or one of the greatest coaches of all time.
Agreed. All right, let's go ahead and move into the power forwards now. We've got at the top, we've got basically LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin. I'm not sure if I'm ready to put Mirotić in that top tier yet, but he's your number 3 power forward there. Tobias Harris is in that game that we've been talking about, with the Phoenix Suns and the Clippers. Anybody in this top sort of tier that we're looking at tonight?
I'm only choosing one there. I'm probably going with Blake Griffin at $8,400. Since coming over from the Clippers, him and Andre Drummond have been a great 1-2 combo there. They both. I think we were a little concerned about how that production was going to go, especially with Drummond having the great season so far, like if he's going to take a hit with Blake Griffin coming over. But no, they're both working out pretty well together and putting up the points needed at their salary. So I know Boston's kind of a tough matchup, but Blake Griffin, with his usage percentage and just how good of a player he is, I don't think the matchup is going to deter me from using him tomorrow night. Agreed,
100%. And like I said, I'm not sure if I'm on Mirotić yet. I'm a Pelicans fan, and I think he's good for the Pelicans, but I don't think this is the matchup for him, so I'm not paying up for Mirotić tonight. All right, as we move down a little bit into the $6,000 ranges, is there anybody in this mid-tier you like?
You kind of hit on him a little bit. The fourth price guy there, Tobias Harris. I like him as a good cash game option. He's had a solid 4 since coming over to the Clippers from Detroit. If you move down a little bit, it's kind of surprising to see Powell at $6,700, but his minutes have come up, his production's come up. They're starting to use him more over Dirk a little bit. Even with Dirk back healthy, Powell still has seen a pretty nice production, and that is a great matchup against the Lakers. As we mentioned, it is a pace-up game. They're pretty bad on the board, so I think Powell is in play, even though his price is elevated. Probably more for cash games, not for GPP, because I don't think you're going to get too much upside out of that $6,700, but he's definitely in play there.
Agreed there. I think his upside is limited on what he can do at that price point, but I think if you're going to play him in a cash game, I think he's definitely good. He looks like he's put up 34, 33, 33, and 31 over his last 4 games, so you can't beat that in a cash game. All right, let's go ahead and slide down to some of these value guys here. Is there anybody in this lower tier that you like tonight?
Yeah, I got a handful of guys I like here. I mean, you can never go wrong with Todd Gibson. As I said earlier, Thibodeau is pretty straightforward with his minutes for his starters. Gibson, all of them are going to see around 35 to 40 minutes. So that matchup at Houston's a decent one for him. So I don't mind him at $5,400. If Kelly Olynyk's out for the Heat, James Johnson and Bam Adebayo are both in play. I'd probably say Johnson's probably more the cash game option, whereas Adebayo is probably the GPP option if you're going there, since he has the block and upside there. Henson coming back from injury, I think he's a decent option at $5,000. Ever since the Bucks have fired Jason Kidd, his minutes have stabilized, which I'm sure all of us in the DFS industry are probably pretty happy about, because before, when Jason Kidd was the coach, it was like, okay, Henson's going to get 15 minutes one night and then maybe 30 the next night. It's just the revolving door with the minutes there with the big guys there. And also Jabari Parker at $3,900. And I know he's on minute restriction, but he has been somewhat productive at that price range. So if he does happen to see a couple extra minutes tomorrow night, I think he can pay that price tag off.
Yeah, I like that call on Parker as well. I think he's been kind of sliding under the radar because of the minutes restriction. He'll likely be low owned because of that, but eventually they're going to take that restriction off, or at least extend it a little bit. And I think he's got a high enough usage there with that second team that he can actually put up some decent numbers at his price tag. So yeah, good call on Parker there. All right, let's go ahead and move into center. Let's see who we got at the center position tonight. So the top guy we have there, of course, is Anthony Davis, who I think started the season off as a power forward, and then, of course, when Boogie got hurt, they've since moved him to center. Karl-Anthony Towns is up in this top tier. We got Drummond, we got the Joker. Dwight Howard can probably sneak into that top tier as well. DeAndre Jordan. So we got a lot of good top tier centers here. Is there anybody here that you're willing to pay up for?
Yeah, I mean, when we have this many elite centers on the board, I usually do try to make it a priority to try and pay up for one of them at center. My philosophy has been if you go with the cheaper option, it's really hard to make up for the upside that any of those guys possess up to the top. Because pretty much if you're going with the cheap guy, you're banking on all those guys failing when you can only roster one center in FanDuel. So when we have this many elite options on the board, I'm definitely trying to pick out one or two that I'm eyeing and for my various lineups. And out of these options, I like Anthony Davis a lot, and I also like Andre Drummond. As you mentioned, as we both mentioned earlier, with Cousins out, Davis has seen a huge uptick in usage percentage. He's still paying off his price tag as it comes up or increases. It might be somewhat of a tough matchup with the battle between him and Hassan Whiteside, who's a really good rim protector. So I think out of those two, I would prefer the savings with Drummond so I can spread out my salary a little bit more to the other positions. As we mentioned, Drummond with Griffin arriving in Detroit has still been pretty great. And out of all the positions in Boston, I mean, they have a pretty good defensive unit, but all the positions, they do struggle a little bit with center compared to the rest of them.
Yeah, I think that's a lot to do with the rebounding too, which we know Drummond is one of the best rebounders in the league. So I think that he can definitely get a double-double easy, and he probably put up, close to 40 or 50 FanDuel points for sure. I think I like Drummond a lot. I also like Anthony Davis, like you said, and Karl-Anthony Towns too is another one that he's hard to figure out sometimes because he does have those down games. But in a game with Houston and this high pace, high scoring affair, I could see Cat being a good play as well at the same price as Drummond. So he might be a contrarian alternative to Drummond. I think Drummond will be pretty high owned against the Boston Celtics. All right, as we move down into these mid-tier guys, we've got we got Gobert in here, we got Clint Capella, Julius Randle, the aforementioned Whiteside. Anybody in this mid-tier you like?
Yeah, I like a couple of those names you mentioned. I do like Rudy Gobert since he is pretty active on the defensive end. He's always racking up a couple blocks and steals there, so he's definitely in play against Portland. I know Nurkic is kind of a tough matchup with him, but I do like Rudy Gobert there. Clint Capella has been having a great breakout season this year. I think against Cat, who's not really known for his defense, I think that's a solid option as well at that price range. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in the mid-tier. I'm not so much on Hassan Whiteside, especially with Eric Spoelstra being kind of hit and miss with his minutes. Maybe if you want the tournament upside, I can see that because he will probably have to play a heavy amount of minutes against Anthony Davis, but I can't trust him for cash games at all.
Yeah, the thing I worry about with Whiteside is he's very foul prone, and with Anthony Davis being his guard, I could see him getting early foul trouble and then not getting a chance to really put up enough minutes to return value. So that's the thing I'm worried about with Whiteside. But yeah, I like those two other calls. I saw a recent stat with Clint Capella that when Chris Paul, James Harden, and Capella are on the line on the team at the same time, all three of them are healthy. I think they're like 26-1 or something. They haven't lost they only lost that one game. But then the stat that took it even further was that they had a winning record with Harden out. They had a winning record with Chris Paul out. But with Clint Capella out, they have a losing record. Now, granted, it's not a whole lot of games, small sample, but just interesting to note that he sort of makes that offense go because he draws away those double teams and everything else and allows those shooters to get open and do what the Rockets do, and that's just shoot the ball.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely having a breakout year, in my opinion, this season.
Definitely. All right, let's move down into these some of these cheaper guys down here. We've got we got Pau Gasol, who's been a pretty popular cheaper play. We got Marcin Gortat, which you can never really figure out. Brooke Lopez is down here. Is there anybody at all that you like down here?
To be honest, there's really not anybody I really like in the cheap end of the center. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not really one that really pays down, especially on such a large slate. I'm not one that really likes to go the value route. If it was a smaller slate or if there was an obvious injury replacement guy who's like $3,500 and you want to punt there to maybe get LeBron and Butler at shooting guard or a small forward, then that would make sense. But in my opinion, there's not really anybody down here that's worth punting in favor of anything else at center tomorrow night.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I kind of like your strategy too with the elite centers being so many of them that you don't want to, try to pay down when you only can roster one center. That's kind of a neat strategy. I actually never heard that before. So interesting note there. The only one I kind of would be interested in, and it's more of just a narrative than it is an actually, stat-based pick, and that would be Greg Monroe. Going back to Detroit, matched up against Drummond. I don't know how many minutes he'll get in that game, of course, but just an interesting sort of, I wouldn't say revenge game because it's been a while since he's been in Detroit, but I think historically speaking, I think he's wanted to kind of show out against Drummond when he's there. I don't have numbers to back that up, but from my recent memory, I just remember him being very good when he plays in Detroit. So he'd be an interesting one down there at almost minimum salary at 3.6K. So that's the only guy I really wanted to mention other than the ones you already did.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to take into consideration that narrative street there, but I don't know. I just can't get on board with him. I don't know. We don't know how many minutes he's going to play. Horford is healthy, so we don't know how many minutes he's actually going to get there. So I don't know. I can't buy into even that narrative there this time around at least.
Fair enough. All right, let's take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we're actually going to talk a little bit of starting five. Which I know me and you both play a lot. Actually, probably play more starting five contests than we do some of these classic contests. You ready to hang around for that?
Yeah, sure.
All right, we'll be right back.
Do you need advice for your fantasy football team? How about your DraftKings or FanDuel lineup? GoingFor2.com has you covered. GoingFor2.com has exclusive content from some of the best fantasy writers in the industry, whose credentials include Bleacher Report, Fantasy Pros, and Fantasy Life. From advice columns to player ranks, GoingFor2.com has it all. Sign up for our newsletter to have all of our content sent to your inbox. Start winning today. Visit GoingFor2.com because no one remembers the extra point.
Today's show is brought to you by Daily Fantasy Nerd. They have everything you need to build better lineups. You can analyze stats, view up-to-the-minute Vegas lines, check player game logs, import and manage your own projections, build optimal lineups, and a bankroll tracker. To get started for free, visit goingfor2.com/dailyfantasynerd. That's goingfor2.com/dailyfantasynerd. Start winning today. All right, welcome back. Again, we are here with Kaz Kalita of GoingFor2.com, FantasyPros.com, and BigBoyFantasySports.com. We're going to be talking some starting five contests. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the format, you basically pick five players. You pick two guards, either a point guard, shooting guard, doesn't matter. You just pick two guards, two forwards, and one center. That's pretty much it. Everything is a little bit different with the pricing, but the scoring is the same as classic contests. Before we jump into the slate, Kaz, I want you to just kind of go over some basic strategies that you've used as you've been playing in the starting five.
Sure. So the first thing I usually do when I look at the starting five slate, I kind of try to decide what path I want to go. Do I want to go stars and scrubs, or is it a balanced night? So that's kind of where I start, and then I go from there. If there's a lot of value options, then obviously you want to go stars and scrubs. But I don't know. For the most part, I have been going balanced lately. And I think at the start, when it first came out, I could go stars and scrubs because there were a lot of people that didn't know what they were doing with their lineups. So I saw some pretty ugly lineups. I was able to take advantage of them when I was playing against them. But as you know, if you go stars and scrubs all the time, there's pretty high variance because you really need the stars to go off, and you really need the scrubs to not get you less than 10, especially in this format. So the last couple of weeks, I've been going more balanced for my cash games and using the stars and scrubs more so for the GPP contest.
Agreed. I've had a lot of success with the sort of balanced, on a night like tonight where you've got so many options, you can almost fade the big stars and play just a sort of a middle of the road lineup. You basically try to get between 30 to 40 FanDuel points as a floor for your guys, because I think typically if you're in cash games, if you get 175, 180, you're going to be in your cash game money. GPP that might be a little bit higher. Of course, some nights are different. Small slates, I typically tend to pay up for the big guy, whoever it may be. If it's Russell Westbrook, if he's the only big name and it's a 3 or 4 game slate, then I'll pay up for Westbrook because you got to have him in your lineup. But on a night like tonight, I can see myself going a little more balanced because there's so many options here. So let's go ahead and just jump into that. Of course, like I said, it's guard, forward, center. They don't break it down into point guard, shooting guard, etc. So the first position we have here is going to be the guards. Of course, at the top, we've got James Harden at 16,000. We got Oladipo at 15,000. Damian Lillard at 14,000. Chris Paul, Bradley Beal, all at 14,000. Is this a night that you want to pay up for a guy and go stars and scrubs, or are you looking more for a balanced lineup tonight?
At the moment, I'm kind of looking more balanced. I don't think there's a lot of value that's opening up at the time right now. I mean, if we get more news tomorrow throughout the day and it opens up a value option that's with somebody that's 8,000 or 8,500 or somewhere around there, then maybe it makes sense to pay up for someone like James Harden. But for me, I'm going the balance route. But if there is one guy you are spending up for, it is Harden when you look at the salaries. I mean, he's only $1,000 more than Victor Oladipo, $2,000 more than Lillard. So if you are spending up, I think you have to spend up on Harden, and I don't think it makes much sense to drop down and save $1,000 and go Oladipo when there is a huge difference between going Harden and Oladipo.
Agreed. And just so the listeners out there know, in starting 5, the increments are all 500. So it's 15,000, then it's 15,500, then it's 16,000. There's no 16,300 or 100. It's all in increments of 500. So when we're talking about salaries, you'll kind of know what we're talking about there. But yeah, I agree. I think if you're going to pay up, it's Harden, because there's no reason to not pay up for Harden. If you're going to pay up for Oladipo or Lillard or any of those guys, you must just go ahead and go up to Harden. As we move down into some of these other guys here, we've got Kemba Walker, we've got Drew Holiday, we've got Kyrie Irving, the guy you mentioned for Classic Contest. We got Donovan Mitchell here. Any of these guys in sort of that $13,000 to $12,000 range that you like?
Yeah, there's definitely a handful of those guys that I like there, and that's probably where I'm living at with the guard position tomorrow night. I like Holiday, as we talked about earlier with the classic version, and then Mitchell, as you mentioned, and then I think Devin Booker at 12,500 is a good one, and then also Alfred Payton at 12,500. I think those 4 are the ones I'm keying in right now, and I'm not really looking elsewhere at this moment.
Definitely. The only one I would mention that you missed was Lou Williams in that same Phoenix game.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
Yeah, got to have Lou Williams in at least one lineup because you never know when he might go off. So, yeah, I like all those calls for sure. All right, as we move down into the lower tiers here, we've got Thomas Satoransky down here, which has been a popular play. I played him tonight. Last I checked, he was pretty good. We've got Rajon Rondo, which you never really know what you're going to get from Rajon Rondo on a night-to-night basis. Wiggins is actually down here. He's had some decent games, but he's kind of fallen off lately. Is there anybody at all that you're interested down here at the end, at the bottom of these, at the $10,000 range?
There are a couple of guys that I'm not too high on them. As you mentioned, I think Satoransky is all right. I'm not too high on Rondo. Like you said, he is really hit and miss. I feel like every time out for Rondo, he has a huge game, and then the next night he's on the slate. It's like everyone's going to him, and it's like, oh man, I gotta have Rondo, and then he puts up a dud.
Yep.
So he's hit and miss. I don't know. I can't get on board with him, especially on a pace down matchup against the Heat. And at $11,000, I'd much rather go up to his teammate Drew Holiday at that point. I think Nicholas Batum's all right at 10,500. He came back about a month before the All-Star break and started to get his legs underneath him and started to put up some decent games. I think for cash games, I think he's a decent option at 10,500. And then if you drop down a little bit more, Ish Smith against Boston, I think it's okay because Reggie Jackson's still out. 10,000. He's at $10,000. He should come close to hitting that 3x mark that we want to hit with in the starting 5. So he's also on the table if you want to go down that low.
Definitely. All right, let's go ahead and look at the forward position now. At the top, of course, we got LeBron James. We got the Greek Freak. We got Jimmy Butler, sort of the same order we had him on the main slate. Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge is in here. of the guys that are up sort of at the top here, I know you mentioned you like Butler on the Classic, you like Blake Griffin on the Classic. Are you liking them here as well, or are you looking a little bit lower down?
I'm liking both those two there. I think at 14,000 and 13.5, I think you can work them in your lineups a lot easier than trying to pay up for LeBron at 16. Out of those two, I think I give Butler the slight edge, even though he's $500 more. His usage rate is just a little higher, and then also with how active he is on the defensive end and how active he's going to have to be on Harden, I just think that he's worth the extra $500 there. As far as anyone else in that range, I don't know. I'm not really high on Aldridge when you can get Griffin at the same price. And then, as I mentioned, I think I'd rather have Butler over Greek Freak and LeBron as well there.
Yeah, I agree with you on Butler. And you kind of mentioned his defensive activity going to be guarding Harden most of the night. I think someone needs to sort of create a stat and call it like defensive usage, because I think Butler will have plenty of defensive usage in that game, trying to chase Harden all over the court. But yeah, I agree. I think when you got a guy like Butler that can play offense and defense, he's going to rack up some of those steals, some of the blocks, those kind of things. So yeah, I think that sort of creates a nice, good floor for him. And then, of course, he gets the upside because he can go off at any moment. And that game will be sort of a high-paced, very high-scoring game. So Butler definitely gets to play for me as well. All right, so we're sliding down here into some of these mid-tier guys. We got guys like Brandon Ingram down here, the aforementioned Dwight Powell, Harrison Barnes. You mentioned Gallinari before. He's at 11,000. Any guys that you like in this range?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit more there. 12,000, I like Tobias Harris there. I think he's a decent floor option, as we mentioned, the classic version, with being able to hit maybe 35, 36 FanDuel points. I think that's very much attainable, which is what we'd be looking for at that price range. Danilo Gallinari is another one as well, and especially in that game, the Clippers at Phoenix, as we mentioned, that's going to be pretty high-paced, high-scoring game. So I think he's a good cash game option, and then Josh Jackson at 10,500 is another decent one down there as well.
Any interest in Joe Ingles? I know he's been sort of a popular play going into the All-Star break, because he is now the starting two guard there. He's been pretty good there. He's $11,000 playing Portland. What do you think of Ingles?
I think he's an okay option, but for me, I think he's a little bit too dependent on scoring for me to get on board at 11,000 when you can use Gallinari. The same price range, who does fill the stat sheet a little bit more than Ingles does. Gallinari will get the boards. He's a little bit more active on defense. So for me, I'd probably go Gallinari over Ingles at that price range.
Fair enough. All right, so now we're moving down into the $10,000 and below range. Anybody down here that you like at all?
I mean, if Kelly Olynyk is out, I think Bam Adebayo at 9,000 is your key to maybe going stars and scrubs if you want to go that route tomorrow night. So if Olynyk's out, he's an option at that cheap. If you want to go up a little bit more, as you mentioned earlier, with Todd Gibson at $9,500, I think he's a good option here as well. So those are two cheap guys I'm really looking at.
What about you mentioned the guy in the classic slate as well, and I see him down here at 85, Royce O'Neal. Any interest in him at that price point?
Yeah, I'm on board with him as long as Rubio's out and there's usage that's freed up there. I'd be on board with him for sure.
All right, let's go ahead and look at center. As we already know, we've got plenty of elite centers on the slate tonight. We got Davis, Jokic, Towns, Drummond are all sort of grouped together at the same price point at 14.5. Dwight Howard at 13.5, and then we go down to Jordan, Gasol, and then of the elite guys, are any of these guys worth paying up for tonight?
I think Drummond is at that price range. I mean, at 14,500, we're looking at roughly about 43 or 44 FanDuel points, which, I mean, he's been getting on the reg since Griffin came over and before. So I think at that price range, that's definitely a good spot for him to pay up for him tomorrow night. As we mentioned, Davis, you can never go wrong there. I think it's a little harder to fit him since he is priced up at 16.5, and there isn't a ton of value at other positions, so it might be a little difficult. But out of those elite guys, I think I'm going right back to the same that we mentioned, the classic, with Drummond and Davis. Yeah,
I agree with you there as well. All right, so we go down to the mid-tier again. We got Clint Capella, we mentioned on Classic Contests. We got Hassan Whiteside, Gobert. I know you said you like Gobert on the Classic. Al Horford's in this little range here. Are these guys the same as Classic, or is there anybody else that you're looking at differently?
I mean, I'd probably say it's pretty similar to the Classic. The only difference is that now they're all kind of priced evenly, whereas in the Classic there are a few $100 difference between maybe Gobert, Capella, and Whiteside. So with that being said, I think I like Capella out of those three. I think it gives you the safest. Also, there is upside too in that matchup since it is going to be pretty high pace and high scoring as well.
Agreed. All right, any cheap guys down here? There's not too many cheap guys on the center slate. I do want to mention that really quick to the listeners. I should have said this in the beginning, but not all players are on the starting five slate. They do eliminate some of the I don't know how you say it, some of the min salary guys that are on the Classic slate. They will not show up at all on the starting five. So the cheapest center we've got here tonight is Marcin Gortat at 9,500. Is there anybody at all down here that you consider punting, or is it just pay up at the center position like you did on Classic?
Yeah, for me, it's pretty much pay up. I mean, a lot of these guys, Tyler Zeller would have been interesting if Henson was out again. I used him a couple of times right before the break, and he paid off pretty nicely. But, all these guys, I think there's a ton of risk, and there's not much upside with many of them either. So I think it's really risky to try and go down there in favor of paying up for other positions. So I think you're better off paying up at center than maybe going a little bit more balanced or cheaper at other positions tomorrow night. Agreed,
100%. All right, that wraps up the starting five slate and the podcast as well. Once again, guys, check out Kaz Kalita at goingfor2.com. He's also on at fantasypros.com and bigguyfantasysports.com. He's an all-around fantasy guy. Very good NBA DFS player as well. Like I said, I've had him on my site for almost 2 years now, I think. So great to have you on, Kaz, and I'd love to get you back on again. We can do this another time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
All right. Go ahead and give them your Twitter handle. If you got a Twitter handle, go ahead and let them know where you're at.
Sure. My Twitter handle is at Kaz_Kalita, and that's where you can find me on Twitter.
Sweet. All right, man. You have a good night, and good luck tomorrow.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Jeff.